Hi, my name is Luke Newport. This is my project one for CSE 8A. Diving right into it, we have our data set, which is a comprehensive view of job satisfaction, and the various different factors that have an impact on this job satisfaction as it is divided into different countries, their geographical locations, so on and so forth. And ultimately, I thought this data set was super significant and relevant to the society that we live in, as it provides and asks very important questions about what we can do to improve job satisfaction, which overall correlates to happiness. These questions that I came up with include what are the countries with a maximum and minimum job satisfaction, what is a correlation between job satisfaction and various factors, and what are the top 10 countries with the highest job satisfaction. And I will also talk about that, and I will show that with print statements and different graphs. So going into the second part of my project, I want to talk about the decomposition. Instead of creating one gigantic function to address all of these different issues, I decided to divide it into different subsets and different functions, which all tackle their own targeted problems and smaller problems, which I have divided to essentially modularize my code. So in the future, let's say if I wanted to go back and have targeted updates or debug certain things, it's much easier to target different functions or smaller functions in portions of my code instead of having to dig through one large function, which ultimately also makes it easier for collaboration, because if somebody wanted to, for say where we're at right now, get the top 10 job satisfactions in the countries, it would be much easier for them to go and say, look at this one function instead of having to dig through an entire gigantic 200-line function and see where we actually perform this small functionality. It also helps avoid redundancies, so I can call certain things numerous times. Kind of getting into what my functions do and how my code works. Starting with some import statements, I use path library at the very end. We're using CSV files. We have matplot library for creating the graph that I will eventually show. I'll start off by showing the max and min satisfaction functions, which will tackle the first question that I asked. These will both open a file, which is the arguments or parameter based on how you're looking at it. It will read this file, which in this instance is data.csv. It reads it as CSV file for this function locally, and it will iterate through as shown in both of these for loops. And each time that it iterates through, it'll check through the 13th index value in data.csv, and it will compare that to max satisfaction, which are predetermined default values, and ultimately, after indexing through all of it to compare each row to max satisfaction, it will end up spewing out the country along with the country's satisfaction, given that it's already passed through this conditional, which should continually reassign or not reassign the value of max satisfaction to whatever the max satisfaction is, or min satisfaction too. Then we have calculate correlation, which is another function that is called throughout all my analyzation functions, which takes in two different lists that will ultimately help in calculating a correlation coefficient, which is a number between -1 and 1, to show if there's a correlation between the factor and job satisfaction. So kind of covering how this all works, we have our analyzation functions, which each one works relatively similar. We start off by opening the file, which is our arguments, data.csv. We create dictionaries, working hours and job satisfaction. We will iterate through to the row that we are interested in, which in this instance is working hours. We also want to look at job satisfaction, and we just kind of want to check whether or not, or not check per se, we want to add this to a big list, a list of tuples, which we call correlation, that we will ultimately use to average out and check if there is a correlation. These other analyzation functions work relatively similar, as they return other tuples, all including job satisfaction and the other factors. so on and so forth. Now we get to the top 10 job satisfactions. This function is solely in charge of getting the top 10 countries with the highest job satisfactions. It will create an empty list, and it will open the file data.csv, and it will iterate through the rows and check to see the job satisfaction along with the country name. And it'll go through, it will find and sort, it'll find all of the countries, it'll add it to a list, and it sorts it from highest to lowest, and from there we take the 10 top values and return those 10 top values. Tying into the end, we have our functions that essentially tie everything together and give the reader a print statement or a plot that we will show. We have print correlations, which takes all of those analyzation functions and all the things that they return, and it will assign them to certain variables, and it will print them with a friendly print statement with some words so it's easier for the reader or whoever to kind of understand what is going on. Right here we do something very similar, except we use Matplotlib, which I have kind of shrunk down to PLT just for short, so it's easier to look at. We go ahead and take the values or the return from this function right here, which is get top 10 data, and where was it? Oh yeah, and then we plot those countries, and we kind of organize the graph a little bit with a title, the x-axis, whatever, and at the very end we show that to the viewer. Right here we have the function that calls the two first functions that address my first question. Again, it will also print out two friendly messages as well as the functions which have print statements in themselves, and we have the main function with the user's absolute path as the kind of file name that we input to most of the functions here. And at the end, we just call that function. And if we run that, we should get a graph with the top 10 countries with the highest job satisfaction and a little scale right here to show job satisfaction with a maximum of around 8. And if we look into the terminal, we can see that this nicely printed out a assortment of different print statements. As you can see at the top, it addresses the first question with the maximum and the minimum job satisfaction, and underneath we have the different correlations with the correlational coefficients, again being from -1 to 1. All of those showing different aspects where, for instance, the first one being working hours and job satisfaction, showing that the higher the work hours are, the less satisfied you are to be with your job, so on and so forth. And that is my project. Thank you.